because I think it's a good question. Okay, Shavua Tov, everyone. Just before we started the recording just now, Leon asked a question which I have to say has crossed my mind many times over the years, and particularly recently when we've entered the world of examining history, examining the slave trade and all this stuff that last week that those people got acquitted of criminal damage, don't ask me how, for toppling Edward Colston's statue and all that nonsense. So Leon, ask your question again, and then perhaps we'll just spend a couple of minutes discussing that before we start shofting, because it's an interesting question. You're muted, Leon. Leon, you're muted.
My query is whether any survey has been done in modern times to find out what the Egyptian attitude is to our bad-mouthing them virtually every day of the week on their behavior towards the Israelites when there were slaves there, particularly at this stage when we're talking about that particular time with the plagues.
Okay, so it's a very interesting question, which I've thought about quite a number of times. And I think we should begin by going a bit more modern and examining how the Germans, current modern day Germans, I know it's much more connected than the modern day Egyptians are to ancient Egypt, but if we examine how modern day Germany has dealt with its history of slavery and murder and attempted extermination of the Jewish people, I think it's a good place to start. And what you see when you look at the German response is a complete spectrum of behavior. There are those, like you would find in any matter, to be honest, that there are extremes on both sides. There are those who are extreme apologetics and who spend their lives remembering the Holocaust and making Holocaust memorials wherever they go. And then there's the other extreme where you've got the neo-Nazis who say we need to finish off the job. So if we ignore the outliers of those extremes and we look at the majority of the German people, what you found was that in the first 20, 30 years after the Holocaust, so up until the sort of 70s, I think, you found a sense of shame amongst the people. And I think there were many studies done that showed that again, like I say, excluding the outliers, excluding the extremes, the majority of the people felt a real sense of shame that they or their relatives or their people had been involved in such heinous crimes. As the crimes became more and more known, their feelings of guilt would have become more and more deep. But I think that what you find today, and what are we, 80 years, not even, 75 years, 77 years since the end of the war, that Vayokom Melech Chodosh al Mitzrayim, actually, there's a whole new generation now of Germans, young Germans. And I know I'm not making a judgment call on this. This is fact. There's a whole new generation of Germans who say, why should I be held responsible for what went on 2 generations ago? Nothing to do with me. Why should we be having to beat our breasts about it? And there is a strong feeling in Germany. I don't know how widespread it is, but it's certainly out there in the public domain. A strong feeling in Germany today that they should stop apologizing, not forgetting and not justifying, but stop apologizing for what went on in the Holocaust, because it's nothing to do with them. And I think that's what I see when I look at the German experience. The Egyptians, so if you take that as a starting point, you could imagine the Egyptians saying, well, look, nothing to do with us at all. We just happen to be in the same country. It's a completely different ancient people, nothing to do with us, and we don't have to get involved. There's an added complication, though, Leon, isn't there? And that is that they are Muslims. The Egyptian country is a Muslim country. And of course, the Muslims also recognize what our Torah as part of their scriptures. They recognize Moshe Rabbeinu as a prophet. They obviously recognize Abraham Avinu as their ancestor as well. So it's much more complicated than just a geographical thing or a national thing, because they can disassociate themselves from the national thing in the same way as we can disassociate ourselves from as British people. We can disassociate ourselves from the excesses of the British Empire in India during the time of Queen Victoria. It's recognized today that the British Empire raped, either physically or economically, the entire continent. Now, I personally, as a British person, I consider myself to be a British person. I'm a Jew, but I'm a British person. I don't feel responsible for what went on in the British Empire. And I don't suppose the Egyptians feel responsible for what went on in ancient Egypt. But if you take the complication of the Muslim thing, it's actually be a fascinating study to do. To answer your question, I don't know whether any studies have been done, but I bet it has, and it would be very interesting to know. So there you are, Leon. You've got yourself some homework now for next week. Anybody else like to comment on Leon's question? I think it's a fascinating question. Yes, David.
Yeah, I think part of the issue is that there is nothing whatsoever in ancient Egyptian history to suggest that the Jews lived there and that they were released from Egypt by Hashem bringing 10 plagues on them. Not an inch of history whatsoever appears there.
So in other words, what you're saying is it would be very easy for them to just deny it, just say, well, it didn't happen, forget about it.
Exactly. Often the way history is written by the defeated army will whitewash everything to suggest that it never happened in the first place.
Yeah, that's another good point. Yeah, very good point. Anybody else? Brian, did you want to add something there? There we go.
About 30 years ago, I was in business, and we were dealing with some Egyptians, and this sort of problem came up. And they said, first of all, don't refer to us as Arabs. I said, pardon? He said, we're Christian Egyptians. We're not Muslim Egyptians. We're not Arabs. We're the descendants of the original Egyptian people. So I said to him, well, how far back do you go in history? Do you talk about the slavery that went on with our people? And he said, that was too far back in history to make any difference to us. And the whole group, about 5 of them, all agreed that that was then, this is now, forget it. But they weren't, as far as they were concerned, Arabs. Which makes
very interesting. Very interesting. So when it suited them, they were Egyptians, and when it didn't suit them, they weren't quite Egyptians. Okay, yes, Stanley.
But what's interesting, do you know that actually Egyptians, as Egyptians from ancient Egyptians, they comprise only like 10-15% of population of Egypt, because it's mostly Muslims and Arabs right now, population of the Egypt. That's why right. I don't know
so
how.
From what you're saying there, Stanley, Brian's comment that his business associates made isn't actually true.
Yeah, probably.
Okay, all right. Fine, that's very interesting. Anybody else before we go on to Shoftim?
Well,
Right, let's move on to Shoftim then. That was very interesting. Thank you, Leon. We'll look forward to your the benefit of your research next week. Let's go on to, what did I talk about? Shoftim. We're on Shmuel, not Shoftim. But we will be going to Shoftim later on this morning. That's why I think I said Shoftim just now. But we're actually in Shmuel Aleph, and we're at the beginning of chapter 11. Let's just remind ourselves where we left off. We left off having Shaul having been chosen by this rather peculiar method of either a lottery or the Urim V'Tumim, depending on which opinion you go by. And the reaction of the people, if you remember right at the end of the chapter 10, was not entirely 100% supportive. There were those who shouted, "Long live the king," but there were others. Verse 27, Leon, of chapter 10, please, the last verse, just to remind us.
but base men said, "How can this person save us?" They ridiculed him and did not bring him a tribute, but he remained mute.
Okay, what we said at the end of last week was that this remaining mute was a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, it showed his modesty, which is a midah, a character trait which is required of kings. On the other hand, misplaced modesty is not good on a king. The king has to respect the crown, has to act in a way that the people will respect the crown, and we spoke about that last week. So now we're actually going to see how Shaul steps up as the king of Israel, and we're going to go into chapter 11. Start the beginning for us, Leon. Let me put it on the screen first of all. Let me get chapter 11 on the screen. One sec. There we go. Have you got that? Yeah, okay. Right. Leon, off you go. Chapter 11, please.
Then Nachash, the Ammonite, went up and besieged Yavesh Gilad, and all the people of Yavesh said to Nachash, "Seal a covenant with us, and we will serve you."
Okay, let's just stop there. I'm not even sure we're going to get any further than this today, but let's see. Who knows? Vayar Nachash. I think that this is another example of something we've spoken about many times before, and that is the issue of names in Tanakh. What does the word Nachash mean?
Snake.
Snake. That's right, snake. Now, if you were lucky enough to be born of a lovely baby boy, and you did a bris, and the male says, "Vayikori Shemo Yisrael," and they shall call his name in Israel, snake. No, I don't think so. I don't think so. Nobody's going to call their kid Nachash, right? So this, again, I think is another example of how people's names often are gained later on. Nom de guerre, maybe. This is his nom de guerre. He was probably a rather slippery character who was cunning and somebody whose tactics were a bit underhand, maybe. And I think that's why he's probably called Nachash. And as it so happens, the name Nachash is quite a common and popular name amongst Sfaradim. I'm not making any connections there. I'm just making a statement of fact that the name Nachash, one of my children's best pal at school was Eli Nachash, lovely, lovely boy. One wonders. Anyway, Vayal Nachash ha'Ammoni. Now, where was Ammon? Anybody know where Ammon was? Well, who was Ammon to start with? Who was the original Ammon from whom this people came? Anyone? Paul, come on, who was Ammon? It's on the tip of your tongue. I can see it there.
One of the sons of Noah.
Sons of Noah? No, but you're not that far away. You're just a few generations out.
Okay.
Go on, David.
Oh, Perry.
Children of Lot.
The
Lot
children
and
of
his
Lot.
daughter.
That's right. If you remember, Lot was seduced by his daughters after the destruction of Sodom, and they thought that he was the only man left in the world, and they seduced him. The firstborn was called, I can't remember which was which, David. Which came first, Ammon or Moab?
Ammon.
I think Ammon came first because Ammon was, he was called Ammon because Am is from the people, from the word Am, people. And Moab was called Moab because he was Me'av from her father. And if I'm not mistaken, I remember reading somewhere in the Forshim that the second one was more brazen, as it were, in the naming of the child than the first one. The first one was a little bit more sort of subtle in the naming, but the second one was absolutely clear that it was Me'av from my father, so that was Moab. So Ammon was one of the children of Lot, which makes them our cousins, right? Lot was the nephew of Abraham. Lot's father was Nachor, and Abraham's nephew, Lot was Abraham's nephew. So Lot's children or grandchildren, I suppose they were as well. Ammon was his son and his grandson all at the same time. They were our cousins. Now, where was their land? Where was the land of Ammon? Anyone know? David, where was Ammon?
The Transjordan.
Yeah, the other side of the Jordan, the east bank of the Jordan, what is today the Kingdom of Jordan. The northern part of that, I think, is Moab, and the southern part of that is Ammon. I could be wrong on that, but either way, it's definitely Transjordan. One second, I just shut the door. Have you got that in the book there, David?
Yeah, it's the other way around. Ammon is north.
Ammon is north.
Okay.
South. That actually makes sense because I'm going to show you a map in a sec. And so this Nachash Ha'amoni. So let's get our geography right now. He is in the north part of Jordan. So if you imagine the map that I'm going to show you in a sec, let's put it on the screen right away and be done with it. Okay, let's move our map over here. Right, so here you have, there's Amman, there's the Dead Sea over there. Can you see the map on the screen, everyone? Yeah, okay. And so Ammon would be up here, northern Jordan. Down here would be Moab, down this area. Over here is Ammon. I wonder whether Amman, the capital of Jordan, is anything to do with our name that we're discussing now. Ammon may well be. Never thought of it until just now. Anyway, that little red blob that I have highlighted on this map is, as you can see, very, very close to the River Jordan. You can see the River Jordan, there's this wiggly line, not the blue, thick blue line, but the wiggly line just to the right of the blue line is the River Jordan. And you can see that little place that I have highlighted there in red, which is right on the border, right on the banks of the Jordan. Anybody want to have a guess what that place is that I have highlighted? Okay, well, let's find out. Carry on and read the first pasuk again, Leon, please.
Then Nachash the Ammonite went up and besieged Yavesh Gilead.
Okay, stop there. That is Yavesh Gilad. Okay, Yavesh Gilad was just on the east part of the eastern side of the Jordan. There is another opinion, by the way, that it was on the west side of the Jordan, but the majority opinion is that it was on the east side of the Jordan. It's thought to be a place today called Tel al-Ful, or the Hill of Beans. Now, the Hill of Beans is also known in Hebrew as Givat Shaul. Givat Shaul. Okay, this is called Tel al-Ful. It's thought that this is Yavesh Gilad, and there it is over there. There's there is Yavesh Gilad. Okay, I've told you wrong there. Tel al-Ful is over here, and that is Givat Shmuel. That is Giv'ah. That's what we're going to see in a minute. Made a mistake. This isn't Tel al-Ful, but it is Yavesh Gilad, just over the eastern border of the Jordan. Now, next question: where have you heard Yavesh Gilad before? Because you have. All of you have heard where this place is before, Yavesh Gilad.
Well, you gave it away that you said when you were looking at Shoftim.
Yes, well done, Paul. You've been a good detective. Now then, whereabouts in Shoftim?
Was it to do with Shimshon?
Yiftach Agiladi.
Yiftach Agiladi was not from Yavesh Gilad. It might have been, but the actual place, Yavesh Gilad, features very prominently. You were the closest, Paul, so far. David?
The civil war with Binyamin.
Yes, the civil war with Binyamin, which occurred after the episode of
Pilegesh Begivah.
The concubine in Gibeah. Remember the story that we're over here? I've got it on the screen for you now. Where is it? Not over there. There it is, I think. Here we go. Yeah, here we go. Chapter 21 of Shoftim. Chapter 21 of Shoftim. You will remember, let's just recap the story of the Pilegesh Begivah. The Benjaminites allowed his Pilegesh to be raped to death by the Benjaminites. The tribe of Benjamin did not bring these people to trial. The rest of Bnei Yisrael, as it were incensed with the behavior of Binyamin and gathered together in civil war against the tribe of Benjamin. And there was an unusual show of unity, except there was one place that did not join the fight against Binyamin. And you will see who that is. And verse 5, Leon, please.
The children of Israel then said, from among all the tribes of Israel, who did not come up to the assembly to Hashem? For there had been a great oath against anyone who would not come up to Hashem, to Mitzpah, saying, he shall surely be put to death. For the children of Israel had relented towards their brother Benjamin, and they said, Today, one tribe will be eliminated from Israel. What can we do to provide wives for the survivors? For we have sworn by Hashem not to give them our daughters for wives. So they said, where is the of the tribes of Israel who did not come up to Hashem at Mitzpah? And behold, no one had come up to the camp, to the assembly from Yavesh Gilead.
Ah, so Yavesh Gilad was the place which did not get involved with the fight against Binyamin. And what happened to those people in Yavesh Gilad that defied the call to arms against Binyamin? Well, let's have a look. Verse 9, please.
People took an account, and behold, there was no man there from the inhabitants of Yavesh Gilead. The congregation sent 12,000 men of valor there, and they commanded them, saying, go and strike down the inhabitants of Yavesh Gilead by the edge of the sword, including women and children. This is the thing that you shall do. Destroy all males and all females who have had relation with males. They found among the inhabitants of Yavesh Gilead 400 virgin girls who had never had relations with a man, and they brought them to the camp at Shiloh, which is in the land of Canaan.
Okay, let's stop there. So you remember what happened. Yavesh Gilad, all the men and all the married women were slaughtered by their own people, by the other tribes. This was civil war, and they left 400 unmarried women. And you remember the story, they gave those women over to the tribe of Benjamin as wives, so that the tribe of Benjamin would not be completely decimated. This is a story that we read, and we went into in some great detail in our shiur. And this is the same Yavesh Gilad that we're talking about here. And it's relevant that it's Yavesh Gilad, because we're going to see something interesting right now. So let's go back to our chapter 11 in Shmuel, and let's just do that. Yes, Paul.
Yeah, just a question. Which Shevet were the people from Yavesh Gilead? Also, on my map, it shows that Ammon is rather to the east of where you're. I don't know if you can see it.
Yeah, it. I can't see it because of your background, but you're right. It is to the east, and the reason for that is that where Yavesh Gilad is in the territory of Manasseh.
Right.
If you remember our tribal map, let's see if we can just find that quickly.
That's the one I'm using. Yeah, I think.
Yeah, our famous tribal map. I think I've got it on my desktop now. I should have by now, shouldn't I? Where is it? There it is. Let me just share that with you very quickly. Stop that share. I'll show you a different share. One sec. There we go. So we are, where are we? We're over here. Actually, it's not, is it? It's actually in Gad, according to this map, because it's right on the Jordan border. I'll show you the actual map in a sec, the Google map in a second, but it's right close to the Jordan River, which actually makes it in that green bit there. Can you see the map on the screen? Yeah. So it's in that green bit there, very close to the Jordan River. So it's actually in the territory of Gad, not in the territory of Manasseh. I was wrong. I had forgotten or hadn't taken notice of the fact that there's this strip of land here, which seems to belong to Gad. So you're right, Paul. Ammon was there, but we nicked it off them before we went into the land. This was the land that was given to Gad, Reuven, and half of Manasseh, and so they got pushed out to the side. So Ammon is over here, as you say, to the east, and our Yavesh Gilad, which makes sense because these people were threatening Yavesh Gilad. They wouldn't be going over here and threatening Jaffa in Dan because they'd have to go all the way through there. This is where they've come to. This is where they're threatening. So that makes sense. So let's go back to the other screen. Let me show you the map again, where we are. Share screen map. So there's the map again. So you can see that's where Yavesh Gilad is. I suppose a little bit, maybe a third of the way between the Kinneret and the Dead Sea, right on the border of the Jordan River. Ammon is over here to the right on the map to the east, where I'm circulating the pointer there. So, so which tribe were they from? I think you'll see, Paul, as we go along, that they've definitely got a connection with Binyamin. Whether they're from Binyamin or not, they've definitely got a connection with Binyamin because they married in. They're not from Binyamin originally. We know that because they were told off for not joining in the fight against Binyamin. Right, so we know they're not from Binyamin. They're probably from Gad or Manasseh, since they're on this side of the river. But remember, 400 Benjaminite virgins were imported. No, the other way around. 400 Yavesh Gilead virgins were imported into the tribe of Benjamin that we just read. So there was obviously by this time an interconnection between Yavesh Gilad and Binyamin. I suspect the answer to your question is Gad or Manasseh, but there was obviously a firm connection between Binyamin and Yavesh Gilad. So let's do the pasuk again. Verse 1.
Chapter 9.
Chapter 11.
Then Nachash the Ammonite went up and besieged Yavesh Gilead. And all the people of Yavesh said to Nachash, seal a covenant with us, and we will serve you.
Okay, let's stop there. Seal a covenant with us, and we shall serve you. What's going on here? These people, the Gilad, the Ammonites, we've just said, haven't we, that really this land is theirs. Only Moshe Rabbeinu conquered it before his death, and it was carved up and given to Reuven, Gad, and half of Manasseh. So I dare say the Ammonites were not too chuffed about that. And over the ensuing years, they will have presumably tried to liberate their lands from those tribes. And this is probably another example of that. They are attacking, or they've besieged, they've camped against, by Yichan al, they've camped upon, in other words, they've besieged, as Leon read out, this place called Yavesh Gilad. And Yavesh Gilad don't fancy the fight at all, and they've said, make a treaty with us and we will serve you. In other words, they're ready to surrender straight away. They're not interested in a fight by the looks of it. David, you've unmuted yourself. Are you going to add something to that?
No, I'm hoping you're going to add something to that.
Okay, well, I'm going to talk about this idea of a Brit right now. If you are in a position of tremendous weakness, in that you are being surrounded by a much, much more powerful enemy, and you say to them, make a treaty with us and we shall serve you, that's a surrender. That's a treaty of surrender, isn't it? It's not what we would normally think of as a Brit. What do we normally think of when we talk about a covenant, a Brit? So think about Brit Milah for a start. What do we think about there? We think about an agreement between two sides for mutual benefit, right? We say, we will become your people, and God says, I will become your God. That's what a Brit Milah is about. The Brit Ben Abatarim that Avraham Avinu did. God says, you will get the land and the nation, and Abraham accepts, as it were, God as his supreme God. So this is not really what I would call a Brit. But to me, the term Brit has connotations of a mutually beneficial agreement, whereas this is really an article of surrender. It's basically saying, don't slaughter us, we'll become your slaves, and we'll make a treaty. Why would they make a treaty? Why would they want a treaty with this? They just go in, and we know what happens normally. They go in and kill them all, or take them as slaves. So it's very interesting. I never noticed this before until I was preparing for this shiur. I'm going to show you a couple of places where the word Brit is used in different ways. So the first one I'm going to show you is in Bereshit chapter 26. Bereshit chapter 26, and it's verse 28. So what are we talking about here? This is where Yitzchak had been digging wells, and the people around him had been filling them in and starting with them and arguing over the wells. You can see over here, verse 19, Isaac's servants dug in the valley and they found there a well of living waters. The shepherds of Gerar quarreled with Isaac's shepherds and says it's ours. And then they dug another one, they quarreled with that one, and then they dug another one and they filled it in. It was all arguments about water. And then we come to here, verse 28. Leon.
And they said, we have indeed, excuse me, we have indeed seen that Hashem has been with you. So we said, let the oath between ourselves now be between us and you, and let us make a covenant with you.
Okay, let's stop there. Now, let us form a covenant with you. That's what it says there on my screen. How did you say that also? Make a covenant with you?
Yes, yes.
Now, our translation here says make a treaty with us. Okay, covenant, treaty, same word, Brit. How does your translation go in chapter 11, verse 1?
Then Nachash the Ammonite went up and besieged Yavesh Gilad, and all the people of Yavesh said to Nachash, seal a covenant with us.
Okay, so they do use a covenant. So you wouldn't know any difference. Looking at the English, it looks exactly the same. Make a covenant with us in chapter 11 of Shmuel Aleph. And in Bereshit, it says in verse 28, form a covenant with you. Exactly the same. Uses the same word Brit. Only if you look carefully at the Hebrew, there is a slight difference, which is not reflected in the English translation. It can't possibly be, because it doesn't make sense. Here, where the two sides, as it were, have got mutual benefit to be had, this is Yitzchak and Gerar, they both stand to benefit from this covenant. The word that is used is Brit imach, with you. So using the Hebrew word im with an ayin. Im with an ayin means with. Okay, so Brit imach, a covenant with you. in our chapter, chapter 11 of Shmuel, Karat Lanu Brit. La means two, not with, but two. So when you cut a Brit with somebody in Hebrew, that is what we would understand as the traditional covenant, mutually beneficial. When you cut a covenant la, as opposed to im, that's got a different connotation altogether. That's got a connotation of one being the powerful one and one being the subservient one. And we see that in another place, which we've also done together, but I don't expect you remembered it because I certainly didn't. And that is in Sefer Yehoshua, chapter 9. Sefer Yehoshua, chapter 9, talks about the crazy story. If you remember this crazy story, Yehoshua was busy going in, conquering the land at a speed of knots. He'd been to Jericho, he'd been to Ai. And then these people from Givon decided that they were going to pull a fast one. Remember this story? They pretended that they'd come from far, far, far away, right? They made their shoes look worn out. They bought moldy pita bread and they made themselves look parched. And they said, we've come from a very, very long way away. There we go, verse 9 there, Leon, please, if you want to read that.
They said to him, your servants have come from a very distant land for the sake of Hashem, your God. We have heard of his fame and all that he did in Egypt, and all that he did to the two Amorite kings that were on the other side of the Jordan, to Sihon, king of Heshbon, and to Og, king of Bashan, who was in Ashtaroth. Okay,
so then what he goes on to say is, he says, and they told us, our people said, go to this people far, far away, these Israelites, and make a covenant with them. Have a look at what it says. Verse 11, please.
Our elders and all the inhabitants of our country spoke to us, saying, take in your hands provisions for the journey and go meet them and say to them, we are your servants. Now seal a covenant with us.
Okay, and have a look at what it says here. Avdechem anachnu, we are your servants. V'ata, and now, kirtu lanu brit. Not itanu or imanu. Doesn't use the word im, it uses the word la. Exactly the same as our chapter 11 of Shmuel Aleph. And in fact, it uses the same expression of being slaves as well, or servants. Krat lanu brit v'na'avdecha. Make a brit, make a covenant with us, and we will serve you. And in Yehoshua, it says, we will be your servants, make a covenant with us. Exactly the same language. Now, what happened to those Givon? There was no equality between Givon and the Israelites. Givon became their servants. They became the lowly workers of the Israelites, and they became the hewers of wood and the drawers of water. Verse 23. You are cursed, and there shall never fail to be slaves from you, hewers of wood and drawers of water. That's because they pulled a fast one, and they weren't really from a long way away. They were just round the corner. And they weren't, and so what had happened now was that they'd wheedled a treaty out of the Israelites, but not a treaty of equality. So this here, this expression "Krat lanu brit v'na'avdecha" is not the Brit of equality; it's the Brit of slavery. So Yavesh Gilad was in effect pledging allegiance to a foreign power, to Ammon, and was pledging to be slaves to them. Now, Nachash was not a very nice man by the sound of things. Before I go on to verse 2, David, did you want to add something to that?
So a few minutes ago, you described what originally happened to the inhabitants of Yavesh Gilead, and assuming that there weren't many generations from the end of Sefer Shoftim to our story here, how come there are any Jews in Yavesh Gilead at all? Have a look at, if you haven't already done so, Johnny, at the Koren, page 94, where he gives like a prelude to this story to explain how there were Jewish people in Yavesh Gilead in the first place, which historically I think is fascinating.
Okay, well, let's do that. Let's have a look at that. Right, page 94. Where in the bit that says Nachash the Ammonite.
That's the one, yeah.
Okay. Okay, so here we go. Nachash, it's described here, I'll just paraphrase it. Nachash was obviously a guy who was a very powerful king going around terrorizing people. And remember, we have over the Transjordan in his area, we have the tribes of Reuven, Gad, and half of Manasseh. So there's this fragment of scroll here that says as follows. The scroll fragment has the following words before the last two words of Samuel 27. And this is as follows. The Nachash, king of Ammonites, sorely oppressed the Gadites and Reubenites, and he gouged out all their right eyes and struck terror and dread in Israel. There was not left one among the Israelites beyond the Jordan whose right eye was not gouged out by Nachash, king of the Ammonites, except 7,000 men who fled from the Ammonites and entered Yavesh Gilead. In other words, the scroll fragment portrays Nachash as having waged a lengthy campaign against the tribes of Reuben and Gad, which makes perfect sense because they have nicked his land. So they're trying to get them back, like I said earlier on. And only 7,000 men of Reuben and Gad had managed to survive the war with both eyes intact and escaped to Yavesh Gilad as their last refuge from Nachash. And so you'll see what the relevance of that is in the next pasuk. So just to recap David's question is Yavesh Gilead should have been empty of Jews because a couple of generations earlier, the rest of Bnei Israel had gone in there, wiped them all out except for 400 virgins who they had then taken and given to Binyamin. So Yavesh Gilad should have been Judenrein, should have been free of Jews, of Israelites. So what were the people doing there? And what we've just read there, fascinating, is that they were refugees from the tribes of Manasseh and Reuven and Gad. Let's just have another quick look at the map, just to show us what's going on. There's our map. Okay, Gad, Manasseh, Reuven. Okay, these are the tribes, and over here, this beigey bit is Ammon and Moab. Okay, this is probably Moab down here, but Ammon and Moab, who are brothers, of course, are over here on the beige bit, and they want it back. They originally had all this land up to the river Jordan, but Moshe Rabbeinu conquered it and gave it to Reuven, Gad, and half of Manasseh. There's the other half of Manasseh, by the way, on the other side of the Jordan. So makes perfect sense what we've just read, that Nachash, the Ammonite, who was the most powerful warrior king at the time, is trying to get all this back. Now, it strikes me that if we're right that Yavesh Gilad is right on the border of the Jordan River, it makes sense that they have actually succeeded in getting all of this land back, because they've managed to get as far as the border of Israel, right onto the Jordan River. Yavesh Gilad is just over there, as we saw on the other map. So that means that Ammon in the beige has now conquered the yellow of Manasseh, the green of Gad, and probably the yellowy, light yellow of Reuven. And they've come to Yavesh Gilead, according to what we've just said, and that all that's left is 7,000 refugees. That's all that's left. So no wonder the inhabitants of Yavesh Gilad are scared of Nachash. And as you can see from what we've just read, he leaves behind a calling card, Nachash. And let's read about his calling card in the next verse. Let me put that back on the screen. There we go. Verse 2. Nachash has just been asked by the inhabitants of Yavesh Gilead that we now know are refugees. And that answers your question, Paul, what tribe they were from. According to what we've just read, they were from Reuven and Gad, which is what we said in the first place. So I think it all fits in very, very nicely what we've done so far today. So verse 2, Leon.
Nachash the Ammonite replied to them, "On this condition, I will seal a covenant with you. When each right eye of yours is put out, it will be a sign of shame for all of Israel."
Okay, let's stop there. So, as I said, this is his calling card. It's a mutilation that goes on, and it's clearly designed, as he says very, very openly, to shame, to humble, to humiliate Israel, because it will be very obvious, all these people with their right eyes gouged out, it's a sign of shame that they have been defeated by Nachash. And according to what we just read, that was what he did to all his victims. Now then, there's a word in there, cherpa, which is used in modern Hebrew as well. Anybody know when we use that word cherpa? You used it the other day, Philip. I'm sure I heard you say it.
Me, cherpa?
Yeah, I'm sure I heard you say it. Maybe not. Anyone?
Can't remember. No.
Okay. David, do you know?
The biblical origin from the story of Dinah, it's a shame on us.
Okay. Yes, that's one of the origins
an
of
embarrassment, it. An embarrassment.
An embarrassment, yeah. And there's also another biblical reference, which I'll come to in a minute. But the modern Hebrew use of it is if something is dreadful, terrible, awful, and it's a disgrace, you'll say ze busha v'chelpa. You ever heard that expression? Busha v'chelpa. Busha is an embarrassment, from the hitbayesh, to be embarrassed. Busha v'cherpa. You may well hear people say that. Ze busha v'cherpa. It's a terribly embarrassing, disgusting situation. So in other words, when you come into shul on a Sunday morning and the people who've had their shalashudas on a Shabbos afternoon haven't bothered to clear it up, and you've got all the crumbs and the old bits of herring lying around on the table, you would say, look at this. It's a busha v'cherpa. It's a bet knesset, Paul. You would use that expression there. So cherpa means a shame. In other words, shame as in I am ashamed. Where else do we see that word in biblical Hebrew? When Yosef was born, what does when he gets his name? What does Rachel, his mother, what does she say when she gives him his name? Yosef li ben acher, give me another son. because Hashem has gathered in, ki asaf Hashem et cherpati, my shame. In other words, she was ashamed. She felt ashamed that Leah, her rival, was shelling out kids for Yaakov and she hadn't, and she felt ashamed. So that expression is used there, asaf et cherpati. So it means shame or embarrassment, worse than embarrassment, shame. So here, if you're walking around with your eye gouged out, then that is a sign of shame, a badge of shame that Nachash, the Ammonite, has defeated you, and he's left his mark on you. That this is a mark, a sign of shame that you are a subject of the defeat by Nachash. Now, Nachash, according to what we've just read before, that David pointed out, had done this to the whole of Reuven and Gad, and there were only 7,000 of them left in Yavesh Gilad, and he wanted them all to have their eyes gouged out. So he says, I'll tell you what, I won't destroy you on one condition, and the condition is that you have to gouge out your eye, and I'm going to make it a sign of shame. I'll call Yisrael, on the whole of Israel. Okay, in other words, the whole of Israel will know and see you, that you are my subjects, as it were. Right, just before we finish, one last connection. Where have you seen this sign of shame before? And we have learnt it together. Where have you seen this sign of shame before? Gouging out eyes. Who had his eyes gouged out?
Shimshon.
Shimshon. There you go.
Samson. Yeah.
Samson. Yeah. Chapter 16. Chapter 16 of Shoftim. This is what happened. Okay. Let's just do verse 10.
Delilah said to Samson, behold, you have mocked me and told me lies. Now tell me how you can be bound.
Okay, so what Delilah was saying at that point, what she was saying was, you've mocked me, you're mocking me, because remember, he wouldn't tell her initially the reason why he was so strong. This is one of my favorite psukim in the whole of Tanakh. Here, verse 16. I'm not going to miss the opportunity of saying verse 16, Leon. Go on.
It happened that after she tormented him with her words every day and pressed him, he became exasperated to death.
I much prefer the translation on the screen. And it was as she nagged him with her words every day and pressed him that his soul was vexed to death. She nagged him to death. This is the first recorded incident of a wife nagging her husband to death. Anyway, that's not why I put this up, but I couldn't miss the opportunity. And so then what did they do to him? Verse 20, eventually he gave in. She nagged him that much that he told her the secret. And they, of course, cut his hair off. He lost his strength. And what did they do? Verse 21, Leon.
The Philistines seized him and gouged out his eyes. They brought him down to Gaza and bound him in copper fetters. He was made to grind grain in prison. The hair of his head began to sprout after he had been shaven.
Okay, let's stop there. So yeah, they gouged out his eyes. They could have just killed him, couldn't they? But they didn't want to just kill him. What they wanted to do was to shame him. They wanted to publicly humiliate him. So they gouged out his eyes and made him grind the grain like a donkey, like a blind donkey in the prison house there. But the point here is that they gouged out his eyes. This was a well-known, apparently, sign of humiliation to have your eyes gouged out. So there we are. That's what was going on over here. I said that we wouldn't get very far today. We did actually get to 2 psukim, not just 1. What we've seen here is that the people of Gilad Yavesh, and by extension, what we read in the Koran here, the whole of the east side of the Jordan, a big area, right? A big area, lots of people in this area here. Let's just have a look at our map again. All of this whole area here is under big attack and defeat by Nachash. Nachash has got as far as the border over here to Yavesh Gilad. He's surrounded Yavesh Gilad, and he said to them, right, I won't do you in, but you've got to gouge your eyes out as a sign of shame for Israel. And then we'll just finish with one, the beginning of, well, let's read verse 3. We're not going to go into verse 3. We'll start next week at verse 3. But let's just read verse 3 to give us an idea of what we're going to get up to next week. Verse 3.
The elders of Yavesh replied to him, hold off from attacking us for 7 days while we send messages throughout all the land of Israel. If there is no one to save us, then we will go out to you and submit.
That's the weirdest thing I've ever read in the history of warfare. And we'll discuss it in detail next week, what's going on there. Any comments on what we've done today so far? Any comments or questions? Yes, David.
Yeah, just to the point you made before about sort of the significance of the naming of the Jordanian capital. Go back again to Koran, page 94, the last paragraph from where you were reading before, Johnny.
Okay, the Ammonites' capital, a main area of settlement in Rabat Ammon, is modern-day Amman, occupied from the 18th century BCE until modern times. There you are. So it is. Amman is named Amman is because of the connection with the biblical Ammon. Thank you for reading that for us, David. I didn't have a chance to read that this morning before I was did the share, because I was busy reading Rav Bazak, as you probably gathered. Yeah, excellent. Any other comments? Okay, Shavuot Tov, everyone.
Thank you, Johnny. Shavuot Tov.
Oh, thank you very much.
Shavuot Tov to everyone. Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you, Johnny, for the share, and thank you for your compliments about my singing capacities for next week.
I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to it, Philip.
I still have to rehearse it. I've still got my cold, but I've started.
Yeah, but if you've got a cold, you've got an excuse when it's no good.
I shouldn't have the cold till next week. How long does the cold last?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. The people who I have to deal with.
Shavuot
Bye.
Tov. See you.